Imagine spending your entire childhood paying for a mistake you never made. Every insult, every sideways glance, every closed door reminding you that, in the eyes of others, you simply did not belong. Now imagine that years later, when the same people who rejected you were staring at defeat, they came looking for only one man to save them: you. That is the remarkable story of Jephthah, one of the Bible's most overlooked figures. His life reads like an epic drama filled with rejection, survival, courage, redemption, triumph, and heartbreaking regret. He was born under circumstances beyond his control, driven away from his family, forged into a fearless leader among outcasts, and eventually elevated to lead an entire nation. Yet the very man who demonstrated extraordinary faith also made one of Scripture's most tragic vows. His journey reminds us that painful beginnings do not define our future, but it also warns us that even great victories can be overshadowed by unwise decisions. As we follow Jephthah's incredible rise from rejected son to national deliverer, ask yourself this question: if the people who wounded you suddenly needed your help, what would you do? And how different might your life become if you stopped allowing your past to define your future? Jephthah's story begins with a reality he never chose. He was the son of Gilead, a respected and influential man in Israel. But Jephthah's mother was a prostitute. In the culture of his day, that single fact became a label that followed him everywhere. Before he had spoken his first words or taken his first steps, society had already written a story about who he was supposed to become. For a while, Jephthah lived in his father's household alongside the sons born to Gilead's wife. But as the boys grew into men, resentment grew with them. They were determined that Jephthah would never share in their father's inheritance. To them, he was an embarrassment, a reminder of a past they wanted erased. One day, the conflict reached its breaking point. His half-brothers confronted him and drove him away with chilling words. "You are not going to get any inheritance in our family because you are the son of another woman." It was more than the loss of property. It was the loss of identity, belonging, and home. Imagine the sting of being rejected not by strangers, but by your own family. Jephthah was punished for circumstances completely outside his control. Yet this painful chapter reveals a truth that still speaks today. People may judge us by where we came from, but God sees us for who we can become. Homeless and unwanted, Jephthah fled to the land of Tob, a rugged frontier far from those who had cast him out. It seemed like the end of his story. The land of Tob was a place where society's outcasts gathered. It was far from the comfort of established cities, inhabited by men who had little to lose and nowhere else to go. The Bible tells us that worthless men gathered around Jephthah and followed him. Depending on the translation, they are described as vain, adventurers, or reckless men. Many were likely people pushed to the margins of society, much like Jephthah himself. What happened next is remarkable. Instead of allowing this group to descend into chaos, Jephthah became their leader. Leadership is never granted by a title alone. It is earned through courage, wisdom, and the ability to inspire confidence. Somewhere in the wilderness of Tob, the rejected son developed into a respected commander. He learned how to make difficult decisions, how to organize men, and how to survive against overwhelming odds. Ironically, God was using isolation as a classroom and adversity as a mentor. There is a powerful lesson here for every generation. Seasons of obscurity are not necessarily seasons of abandonment. Sometimes God prepares his greatest servants away from the spotlight. While others see wasted years, God sees years of preparation. Your greatest disappointments may be quietly shaping your greatest assignment. Years passed, and the crisis Jephthah had unknowingly been preparing for finally arrived. The Ammonites, fierce warriors from the east, began waging war against Israel. Village after village lived under the shadow of fear. Families wondered whether each sunrise would be their last. Israel needed more than soldiers. They needed a leader with courage, experience, and the ability to unite frightened people against a determined enemy. The irony was impossible to ignore. The men who had once dismissed Jephthah as unworthy could not find anyone else capable of saving them. So the elders of Gilead made the long journey to the land of Tob. Imagine the scene. The same roads Jephthah had walked in shame years earlier were now traveled by influential men carrying a desperate request. They found the exile they had abandoned and said, "Come, be our commander, so we can fight the Ammonites." Jephthah's response reveals both honesty and remarkable emotional strength. He did not pretend the past had never happened. Looking into the faces of the elders, he asked, "Didn't you hate me and drive me from my father's house? Why do you come to me now? When you're in trouble?" The elders admitted their need without excuses. "Nevertheless," they replied, "we are turning to you now. Come with us and fight the Ammonites, and you will become the head over all who live in Gilead." Jephthah did something extraordinary. He chose purpose over pride. Before accepting, however, he wisely sought clarity. He asked them to swear before the Lord that if God gave him victory, they would truly make him their leader. Jephthah had learned something hardship often teaches. Never build your future on vague promises. True reconciliation requires trust, accountability, and commitment. The elders agreed, and together they returned to Gilead. The people publicly appointed Jephthah as their head and commander. In one astonishing moment, the man who had once been chased from his home without an inheritance was now entrusted with the future of an entire nation. Life has a way of bringing unexpected reversals. Those who overlook your value today may one day recognize the very gifts they once ignored. But Jephthah's promotion wasn't merely about proving his brothers wrong. It was about fulfilling God's purpose. His rejection had become preparation. His exile had become training. And his greatest opportunity arrived wearing the disguise of someone else's crisis. Now, standing at the head of Israel's army, Jephthah faced the greatest challenge of his life. Yet before drawing a single sword, he would demonstrate that true strength is measured not only by courage in battle, but also by wisdom in seeking peace. Before leading Israel's army onto the battlefield, he sent messengers to the king of Ammon with a simple but profound question. "What do you have against us that you have attacked our country?" It was a remarkable display of wisdom. A true leader understands that every battle worth winning should first be tested by every possibility of peace. The Ammonite king answered with confidence. He claimed that Israel had stolen his people's land centuries earlier during the exodus from Egypt. According to him, the invasion was nothing more than an attempt to reclaim what had always belonged to Ammon. But Jephthah knew the history. His reply was not emotional or impulsive. It was thoughtful, respectful, and firmly grounded in truth. He carefully recounted Israel's journey from Egypt, explaining how they had respectfully requested passage through neighboring lands and had been denied. He reminded the king that Israel had not taken territory from Ammon at all. Instead, the land had been won in battle against the Amorites after they attacked Israel first. For nearly 300 years, Israel had occupied the land without challenge. If Ammon truly believed it belonged to them, why had they waited 3 centuries to make their claim? Jephthah's argument was brilliant because it appealed to history, justice, and reason rather than anger. He even concluded by placing the matter in God's hands, declaring that the Lord, the judge, would decide between Israel and Ammon. But the king refused to listen. Sometimes the hardest lesson in life is accepting that not every conflict can be solved through conversation. You can speak with wisdom, present facts, and extend peace, yet some hearts remain determined to fight. When every honest effort at reconciliation has been exhausted, there are moments when courage requires standing your ground. Then the Bible records a turning point that changed everything. The Spirit of the Lord came upon Jephthah. Those few words explain the victory that followed. Jephthah did not prevail because he was merely a skilled warrior. He succeeded because God empowered him for the task. Strength without God's guidance can lead to destruction. but strength surrendered. To God becomes an instrument of deliverance. Filled with divine courage, Jephthah led Israel into battle. The armies of Ammon, so confident of victory, were overwhelmed. City after city fell before Israel's advance until the enemy was decisively defeated. The nation that had lived in fear was finally free. It was a breathtaking reversal. The unwanted son had become Israel's deliverer. The exile had become a national hero. The man once denied an inheritance had secured the future of an entire people. Yet at the very height of this triumph, a shadow was already forming. Before the battle began, Jephthah had spoken words he could never take back. He made a vow that would transform one of the greatest victories in Israel's history into one of its most heartbreaking stories. Sometimes our greatest dangers do not come before the victory. They come after it, in the promises we make without fully counting their cost. Perhaps the weight of responsibility pressed heavily upon him. The future of Israel hung in the balance. In that moment, Jephthah made a vow that has echoed through history. He said, "If you give the Ammonites into my hands, whatever comes out of the door of my house to meet me when I return in triumph shall be the Lord's, and I will offer it up." It is one of the most difficult passages in the entire book of Judges. The words reveal both faith and human weakness. Jephthah believed God could give victory, but instead of simply trusting God's promise and power, he attempted to seal his request with a bargain. It is a reminder that sincere faith can sometimes become entangled with misguided zeal. God granted the victory. The enemy was defeated. Israel was delivered. Jephthah returned home as a conquering hero, no doubt expecting songs of celebration and embraces from those who had once doubted him. But then came the moment that stopped his heart. The first person to come out of his house was not a servant, not an animal from the courtyard, not a member of his household staff. It was his only child. His daughter came dancing with tambourines, overflowing with joy, celebrating the safe return of the father she loved. She had no idea that her happiness would collide with the words her father had spoken before the battle. The Bible says that when Jephthah saw her, he tore his clothes in grief and cried out, "Alas, my daughter, you have brought me very low." Notice something important. Jephthah did not blame God. He blamed himself. He knew exactly where the tragedy had begun, not on the battlefield, but with his own careless vow. His daughter responded with remarkable courage. After hearing what had happened, she told her father to fulfill the vow he had made to the Lord, since God had given Israel victory. She asked for only one request: 2 months to wander the mountains with her friends and mourn that she would never marry. Jephthah's rash words cost him the joy of the family legacy he treasured most. The greatest lesson is not about God's desire for sacrifices, because throughout Scripture, God condemns human sacrifice and never delights in it. The lesson is about the danger of making impulsive promises in moments of intense emotion. God never asked Jephthah to make that vow. Victory was God's gift, not a reward purchased by a bargain. How often do we make similar promises? God, if you get me out of this situation, I'll never do this again. If you bless me with this opportunity, I'll dedicate everything to you. In desperate moments, we sometimes speak first and think later. The Bible repeatedly teaches that God desires obedience more than dramatic promises, faithful hearts more than emotional bargains, and steady trust more than impulsive vows. Jephthah's tragedy reminds us that spiritual maturity is measured not by the intensity of our words, but by the consistency of our faith. The man who overcame rejection, led outcasts, united a divided nation, and defeated a powerful enemy could not escape the consequences of one reckless decision. It is a sobering reminder that great character in one area of life does not eliminate the need for wisdom in every other area. Jephthah's story is both inspiring and heartbreaking because it reflects the complexity of the human condition. God can use imperfect people in extraordinary ways, yet our choices still carry real consequences. Grace does not erase responsibility, and faith should never replace wisdom. Jephthah's life refuses to fit into a simple category. Was he a hero? Yes. Was he flawed? Absolutely. That is precisely why his story continues to resonate thousands of years later. It is not the story of a perfect man. It is the story of an imperfect man whom God chose to use in extraordinary ways. His journey teaches us that your beginning does not have to determine your ending. Jephthah did not choose the circumstances of his birth. He did not ask to be rejected by his family or stripped of his inheritance. Yet he refused to let other people's opinions become his identity. Instead of allowing rejection to define him, he allowed adversity to develop him. The very wilderness that looked like punishment became the training ground where God prepared him for leadership. His story also reminds us to be careful how we treat people. The brothers who cast Jephthah aside could never have imagined that one day their survival would depend on the man they rejected. Every person carries potential that may not be visible today. The individual others overlook may become tomorrow's leader, innovator, or deliverer. We also learn that forgiveness is not weakness. When Jephthah returned to rescue Gilead, he did not pretend the past had never happened, but neither did he allow bitterness to control his future. He chose purpose over revenge. In a world that often celebrates getting even, Jephthah demonstrates the greater strength of answering God's call, even when it means serving people who once wounded you. Yet perhaps the greatest warning from his life is about the power of our words. One careless vow overshadowed one of Israel's greatest victories. In moments of fear, excitement, or desperation, we can make promises we were never asked to make. God is not looking for dramatic bargains or emotional speeches. He desires hearts that trust Him, obey Him, and remain faithful whether life is easy or difficult. There is another lesson hidden beneath the surface. Jephthah spent years wondering why God allowed him to be rejected. Looking back, we can see what he could not. Every painful experience was shaping him for a purpose greater than himself. Had he remained comfortably at home, he might never have become the courageous leader Israel desperately needed. Sometimes God's preparation comes disguised as disappointment. Maybe you feel overlooked, underestimated, or rejected today. Maybe doors have closed that you were certain would remain open. Jephthah's story encourages you not to surrender to despair. Your present season does not have the final word. God specializes in taking broken stories and writing unexpected endings. He can transform rejection into resilience, pain into preparation, and setbacks into stepping stones for His greater purpose. At the same time, Jephthah's life urges us to walk with both faith and wisdom. Trust God completely, but never confuse faith with impulsiveness. Pray sincerely, but do not bargain with the God who already loves you. Let your yes be yes, your no be no, and your confidence rest not in dramatic promises but in God's unchanging character. Jephthah's legacy is ultimately one of hope wrapped in caution. He proves that your past cannot prevent God from using you, but your future will still be shaped by the choices you make. His life stands as both an invitation and a warning. Rise above the labels others place on you. Embrace the purpose God has prepared for you, and let wisdom guide every step of your journey. If this story challenged or encouraged you, share it with someone who needs the reminder that rejection is never the end of God's plan. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like this video so you won't miss more inspiring stories and life-changing lessons from the Bible.